And okay, looks like we're in business. All right, so first of all, let me just okay, let me just first run through about the midterm next week. Just to remind you, it'll be conducted online via Canvas. So you will get the questions uploaded at 7 p.m., probably a bit before that, in fact. And you must submit your essay by 10 p.m. And please, at that time, all right? So it will be meant to be showing, it should be before 10 p.m., otherwise it'll be indicated as late. So please be sure to, you have the 3 hours to work on it. You choose one out of 3 questions. I'll give you 3 questions. You choose one, the topic you feel strongest in, and please submit your essay as a Word document, all right? Please don't submit it as a PDF file. If at all, if there's any problem with that, let me know, but I would prefer you submit it as a Word document. And I am going to give you a minimum word count. This is not a maximum, this is the minimum, okay? You must at least have written 700 words. Now, you may exceed 700 words, but points will be deducted if it is less than 700 words. All right, so it is really not a very, the minimum is really quite low. But I'm just giving you that figure, and would expect you to be able, over the course of 3 hours, the fact that it's open book, would expect you to be able to write that much or more on the topic that you are specifically answering. It's open book, yes, meaning that you can access books that you've gotten from the library, or your own books, or what's on your computer. Even you are free to go on the internet and to Google the topic and look up material. All right. You might even Google and find some journal articles that would be related, but no group work. One thing that I haven't put here on this list, but which is important, is that I certainly would expect that you would be drawing on more than just what you've heard in the lecture, more than what you've just gotten from the PowerPoint, because it is open book, because you can access materials. And because that is the case, though, you should cite the sources that you reference. I will pay attention to, at the end of your essay, your list of references. All right. In case there's any questions about it, I would prefer it's the APA format. If you are unsure about that, I can give you a link later that shows you what that should be. But I would imagine that that's probably been a requirement in your other courses as well, or in terms of citing and so forth. Mainly, it is being consistent. All right, I'm not real picky about the how you cite, but I do want you to follow a format and follow it consistently. And I would prefer the APA style format. All right, so yes, do reference your work. If it comes from, for example, if it comes from my book on text linguistics, reference that. All right, anything this you quote should be referenced. That should be just a normal practice in any kind of academic activity. All right, and of course that's what I would expect. And I would add that as another point that is important for you to remember. And I will mention that again next week as well. Now, next week, It's on Canvas. You will be working during those 3 hours. I give you the full period. I will be here. I'll be online, just like now, via Zoom. Not to not to give you help. All right, this is up to you. This is your own activity. But in case there's any problems or issues or questions that arise related to the mechanics of what you're doing and submitting and so forth. And I will also give you the contact email of the postgraduate student that is assisting me with the course and who is responsible put to upload the questions and to make that arrangement. So I'll give you that contact as well. So there shouldn't be any problems or issues that arise. I wouldn't expect, but nonetheless, I'll be around. All right. No, you don't have to have any sort of like camera. Uh, you don't need you have a camera on. All right, during the writing of the essay. I'm not going to. It's not like I know during the official exams and so forth. It was required that students should have two cameras on. I'm not requiring that, and I don't require you to have a camera on while you're working here. I expect that you should be, I think you will need the time to be working, and I don't want you fussing about the camera. All right, so I think that's one question that came up. Uh, yes, the full 3 hours. So that's why I definitely expect you to be writing more than 700 words. And I really want this to be uh, treated as really you are, as you come across this question. That's why I mentioned it already, and I want to stress the point. Because it is open book, it's open book in the sense it's not just the PowerPoints, but I would like to see that you are thinking about this, have other resources that you are also relying on, referencing and looking up. And so uh, I think you will need the time to work on it, and I want what you produce to be reflective of the fact that I have given you that 3 hour period in which to work. All right. Okay. I don't see any other questions on the chat. Uh, is there anything anyone would like to just ask quickly, if not on the chat or by voice? Anything before I move on? Am I pretty clear on what I expect? I hope. Okay, let's move on. All right, now last week I gave you 3 sample questions. I hope you've looked at them. And yeah, I've told you it won't be the same 3 questions, but you know sort of the nature of the kinds of questions that I will be asking. Yes, there will be a question related to verbal art, foregrounding, deautomatization. There'll be a question related to the theory and what is the theory behind the method of text analysis that we are working on. And there may be likely specific questions related to the kind of analysis, the kind of uh, grammatical analysis that we're engaged with. Now that would be the first question, which was distinguishing process types, identifying process types. What is the way in which we go about that? I will come back to these later. All right, so we'll talk about this, and that's what we'll be doing today. In addition, I do want to go through the theme analysis. I've gone through and I've been looking at your own analyses, and I see there are certain issues that I hope we can clarify today. All right. So I've gone through some of this already with you, and you should have my model analysis already uploaded for you and have referred to that. Please do. Last week there was a question at the end about the clause analysis for the Pookie text, and in fact that had been uploaded earlier. And so please do check out on Canvas, especially on the files. Uh, you should be checking the week the files that are under a particular week, such as week 7, but also under the homework. And under the homework, I've grouped them under the puff text and the Pookie text. So you should be taking a look at that. Let's just go through the theme. When obviously is textual. I, experiential, grammatical subject. 1B, they. All right, now I've done the first 3 with you earlier, so I'll go through quickly. When again, and we noticed what here? The repetition of the same kind of structure that is repeated here. When I, such and such, they. When I, such and such, they. When and when repeated. Well, we come back, let's just say they. So it's the same pattern in the first 3 sentences. Something that you should be noticing. But in 4, it switches, but when, but. So the but indicates some change. It's textual, of course, and when is textual. In fact, how can we have these 2 conjunctions? I mentioned previously, the but connects this sentence 4 with what was said earlier, the previous sentence, the previous sentences, in fact. And the when, well, the when shows the connection between 4A and 4B. So in fact, both serve a particular sort of range within which they operate. So the but sort of at the sentence level and the when between the 2 clauses that make up sentence 4. But we'll consider for now, just group them together, but when as textual theme. I, experiential theme, obvious. 4B, my mama, she. Now, I, in fact, could be putting both of them together. Both of them, they are really an appositive. That would be appositive, appositive, meaning you have 2 nouns that mean the same thing that are together. And normally an appositive we would treat as the experiential theme. So in fact here for 4B, I should have put my mama, she, both of them as topical theme. 5, and textual, no, interpersonal, I. Okay, it's straightforward. 5B, we're not doing because it's non-finite. We are not analyzing for theme the non-finite clauses. 5C, my mother, experiential theme. Okay. For instance, obviously textual. For example, it's giving, it's illustrating, it's not indicating circumstances, right? It's purely serving a textual function. The circumstance here, though, is theme. Today, on my way here to America's Got Talent, that whole thing is it is several kinds of circumstance. So we'll treat the whole thing together as the circumstance, as theme, indicating both the time, today, and kind of activity on my way here, all right? My mom. Now, I've said it's displaced theme. Why is it displaced? Because we're saying that the unmarked, the usual, the default experiential theme is typically the grammatical subject. But in this instance, it's been pushed out It's been displaced by the circumstance, which has become theme. What that means is that the writer, speaker, made a choice. That choice is to put something else as theme, not the grammatical subject. That choice is meaningful. How is it meaningful? Well, that's what you need to look at in terms of how you're going to interpret the text. Make sure, well, I'm using it as the imperative. All right, so the predicate is first. 6C, what is projected? What are you to make sure? That is textual theme, you. 6D, textual theme, when, experiential theme, you. 7, and like, both of them textual. I, experiential. Why? Again, just like when, taking it as textual theme. It's a WH word. It has to come at the beginning there. It cannot be moved elsewhere. It serves a textual function. You could even argue, yes, it has both the textual and the idea there. Why is reason, right? When is circumstance. So you can argue that there is a sort of an element of both the WH word here sort of stands in for as it serves a textual connecting function, but at the same time, it does have some idea that is expressed here. So you can say that in fact there's sort of the meta functions, the textual and the ideational are sort of conflated together here in that choice of theme. My mother, again, we will take to be as the experiential theme, however. But now 8, arguably, we could have maybe omitted that because 8A is a non-finite clause. My practice usually, though, is that, yes, I don't look for an experiential theme when I'm analyzing a non-finite clause, like a to infinitive or an ing verb. But if there is a conjunction, if there's a textual theme, or if there is an interpersonal theme, even though there is no ideational theme, no experiential element as theme in this non-finite clause, if there's a textual or interpersonal, I normally would analyze for it. I would normally include it in my analysis because later I'm interested to notice the use of conjunctions, the use of textual elements. That explains that. All right. 8B, that's pretty obvious. I. 8C, why? Again, the WH word I've talked about. My mom, experiential theme. 9A, non-finite clause, verb ing. There's nothing textual, nothing interpersonal there. It's just that non-finite clause. I don't bother to analyze anything about it for theme. 9B, as conjunction, textual, I. All right. 10, again, a very complex clause, but because we aren't analyzing the embedded or rank shifted clauses here, I don't have much to do by way of theme analysis. It's the because, which is textual, and I, which is the experiential theme. The rest of the clauses here are all embedded clauses, rank shifted clauses, functioning not so much at clause level, but within, for example, young man who has faith in Jesus, that who has faith in Jesus as being a post modifier of the young man, right? We talked about that before, so I won't go into that here again. 11, so textual, yes, interpersonal, I. 12, and then Textual I, 12B, straightforward. 12C, straightforward again. Now, if any point you feel, and I say it's straightforward and you feel it's not, do ask me about it, all right? 13. 13 is interesting, and for a number of you, you analyzed it quite differently than I would. Fearfully. Fearfully, it's not textual, right? And it's not even interpersonal. Now, what does it say? Fearfully. Now, it describes how. That's why I've taken it to be circumstance. Take it to be the ideational theme. 13 is a bit, well, what could I say? It's how do we analyze it? Because we don't want to treat fearfully as sort of a clause. No, it's not like it's two clauses together. Fearfully is just an adverb. It just describes the manner, how. But then we have the other clause, because normally death don't really bother me. I didn't analyze this as theme because I felt I already have an ideational theme. It already is expressing the circumstances theme. It goes on with a textual theme and so forth. So nothing really follows it, sort of more or less what I would consider like displaced. So I left it like that. Now, you could argue with me perhaps and say, well, you analyze that sort of separately, fearfully, but it's not a clause, right? So it performs that purpose at the beginning. I mean, it's purposeful, it's deliberate, fearfully, because normally death don't really bother me. What's he saying here? How? How what? Now, if you go to take a look at the beat, my mama loved me the same way every mother loved her son. Fearfully. That's how his mother loved him. So it more or less belongs to what was being described already, right? How she loves her son. Again, I want to make it clear when we're doing the analysis. Now, sometimes like 14A, I, yes, 14B, I, again, it is so straightforward. There's no question about it. There's no doubt about it. But when I come to something like 13, when I'm analyzing it, how do I take it as being, what is the fearfully? It almost seems to belong to the previous clause. It's punctuated separately as part of this sentence, however. You have to make up your mind in terms of how you're going to analyze it, what you're looking for, and so forth. And here I felt that the how is what is being put at the beginning. The choice about what you are making theme. It's the fearfully. 15. Complex clause, yes, but I just is the only thing that we would be analyzing as theme. 16, but there, now there, the existential theme. Halliday calls it the existential theme. When you have there is, there are, there is this treated as the subject, all right? And it is considered the theme and considered the experiential theme. Halliday specifically calls it the existential theme. 17, and as textual I, 17B, 17C. This one I also, again, debated within myself whether I should be analyzing this clause, because it's, think here is, the finite is carried by the modal auxiliary couldn't help, but it's sort of a predicate structure, and so I consider think as sort of part of this predicate structure, and therefore I analyzed it and considered it and included it as theme. 17, again, simply I. 18, again, complex clause, but the only thing that we really need to look at is at the beginning here, textual and in that moment circumstance, I displaced theme. My black mother's greatest fear was, and then continues to describe it. 19, again repeats, so yes, so textual, yes, interpersonal. My mother's greatest fear. 19F textual and my mama, and 19G she's speaking, son, interpersonal, don't, more or less the imperative. So again, treating it as interpersonal. I guess when it is a verb that is at the beginning and it's the imperative, I am treating it as interpersonal. At the same time, yes, in fact, again, you see the sort of conflating where it's sort of interpersonal. Yes, it's telling you what what you should do. All right. But at the same time, so it is part of the exchange. It is interpersonal in that nature. But at the same time, it is also expressing the verb, the idea. Tell you something. Really, that argument could be extended further to say that even when you have subject as theme, grammatical subject as theme, aren't you really also telling the listener that you are giving information? Because it's all related to mood choice. Remember mood? What did we say is mood? Subject and the finite. If you switch their order, it's a question. If you don't have a subject or a finite verb there, it's the imperative. So you are saying something by the choice of what you put as theme, even if it's putting the idea there, but putting it first there as the grammatical subject, you're already saying, I'm giving you information. It does have an interpersonal meaning as well. So again, it's in some ways, we notice that you can't just say, oh, well, it's only interpersonal. No, no, no. It also has an aspect of it being the idea as well. 19H, cause, and here is from because, so it's textual. Those three strikes, now there was like that other one where my mama, she, right? And here I did put the positive together as theme. And 19, I and I, all right? Coming near the end. So, dear mom, I, speaking to his mom now, right? When you go back later to look at this, when you start to think about your commentary, I hope as you're doing the analysis, you're reflecting on the analysis that you see. Now, honestly, I don't feel that you can really draw many conclusions yet until you begin to see the three levels of analysis together. And I've often felt this when I've done an analysis of a text, that not until I've done all three in terms of the kind we talked about, theme, transitivity, logical, do I really feel comfortable with the overall clause analysis. I see things as I do the various parts of it that make me sometimes question my clause analysis. So it isn't, and what I'm trying to say is, you look at theme and you might say, oh, well, what can I say about it? There are some things I do think, so that when he does use an interpersonal, dear mom, when he is speaking to her, when she is speaking to him, that dialogue that's there, when he's talking to you, the through the spoken performance, the choices of theme, the I, the first person. Let me finish it. But if I, again, just know, here I took it the imperative, so I'm taking it as theme. Again, why not take it interpersonal too? Yeah, in a way, it's also both the interpersonal through the fact that it's the imperative. Now, when I want you to also feel that that you might say, well, sometimes it doesn't seem altogether clear. It seems that we could have more than one answer. Yes, yes. And it's as you become more sort of attuned to what's going on in the language that you begin to see that, well, yeah, as I said before, all the experiential theme, the grammatical subject, it's the idea, yes, but it's more than that. It's also representing the choice of mood, putting the subject before the finite, expressing that you are making a statement. So it is giving information. It is more than one thing happening in the language. The three meta functions are at work. In some ways, our theme choices, the way we represent theme is sometimes a simplicity. Sometimes we are making a generalization. We could be more detailed about it. Okay? From the analysis that we've looked at, I think we do begin to have sort of a picture, and that's why you put your analysis in an Excel file. Please go back now, look at my analysis, and adjust your analysis. So when you do your final commentary, it shouldn't be based on if there are things that you needed to correct them. Right? So make the revision that you need to. If there are things that weren't correct in terms of your analysis, if there are things that you uh, still would want to debate with me about it, please do so. That's fine. But look at the model that I've given to you, compare that with your analysis. Where you feel that yes, you agree with my analysis, then make the revision, and so that we're on the same page, so to speak, in the end. So what you've submitted to me, I'm expecting that, just like Professor Edwin Tumbu said, the perfect poem is future tense. We might say that the perfect analysis is future tense. All right. So neat in completion must suffice. All right. But here, as we're going through this, I hope your awareness of what you're looking for, what you're doing, is becoming clearer with each step as we are proceeding through it. So that in the end, you'll be paying attention to what were the textual themes. What was it more parataxis? Where was the indication of, was it paratactic? Where's the interpersonal theme? When does he say no? When does he say yes? Where is the let's? Where is the, and as you go through it, you'll see one aspect of it. But again, here I would make the point that you do need to see it within the context of the three. And even these three are not all that there is in terms of analyzing for the grammar. But it's enough here. The transitivity, theme, the logical. All right, so go through those, and let's see. There's a question: couldn't help but do be taken as a whole? Yeah, possibly. I don't think. What was the actual phrase here that was used? Couldn't help but. Let me see. Where was it? Couldn't help but. Is it in this one or is it in the other text?
In this test,
In this text? Which
I
sentence?
think you just miss it.
All right.
I think you just missed it. I saw it, and but you quickly skip the page.
Let me go back.
17A.
17.
Some students stressed it.
Oh, yes, here. Yes, yeah, thank you. 17B, I couldn't help but think. The reason I don't take it as one is because you not only have two verbs here, help, think, but you even have a conjunction that joins. All right. We could think of it sort of idiomatically, perhaps, as sort of altogether meaning that there was no alternative like that. But here, if the grammar is such that it is two verbs and if there's a conjunction, then I'd be inclined to analyze it that way. And not take the other route would be to say, oh, that something is idiomatic and therefore we can sort of group it all together. That would be my response. Okay, let's see.
Um,
Yes,
for Webster, sorry, I think I just missed the why point.
yes,
You were analyzing the why, the where, why, when, and the why clause here
yeah.
is seen as a texture thing. But I thought just like where and when, it could be seen as circumstances. So it's the topical thing, the why clause, isn't it?
The clause itself you could take to be sort of indicating a kind of circumstance, and you'll do that when you come to doing the logical analysis. When you do the logical analysis and you have a when clause or you have a why clause, then you're going to be saying that it is a kind of enhancement related to the circumstance. It's indicating some aspect of circumstance. That will come through in the when you do the logical analysis. But here you're just looking at it in the standpoint of theme, what occurs first. And usually you take the WH words, uh, who, which, when, or not when is, but yeah, when, why, and take those as being textual. But as I said, you could also take the word itself. In fact, that's what Halliday does when he has, for example, uh, okay, let's go to 7B. Okay, and I get why my mother. All right. Now 7B. 7B is related to 7A in the sense of by means of enhancement. And that will be, as I said, what you would analyze when you come to looking at the logical analysis. But here, when you're looking at the grammatical structure of what occurs at the beginning, grammatical elements, you have the WH word. Here it indicates why, and it's indicating a connection. I understand. And then the why is the reason, expresses reason for what is 7. 7B is the reason. That comes through by the choice of why. Now, the WH words, though, they must occur there at the beginning, and that's why Halliday takes them as textual. At the same time, he says they can also be considered experiential because they're also expressing when be circumstance, why would be reason, and so on. So, in that sense, you could argue that the WH words serve side by side, again, sort of conflating together textual and ideation. Okay? So, in fact, if I were were capturing that here, I could take the WH words like in 7B and put the Y both as textual and also topical. But then in that case, would we say that my mother is the displaced theme? Arguably, you could. Okay, so that the Y carries both the experiential and textual aspect to it. It's a connector, but at the same time, what's the connection that it expresses? It expresses the sense of there being a reason for something. And when you have WH when word, it expresses that there is a circumstance. When you have WH who, you're expressing a participant, right? So they're expressing the nature of sort of the experiential element, but at the same time, they're serving as a connector with one clause and the previous one. That is textual. So dual purpose, we could say. Okay.
Okay, understood.
Thank you.
Thank you.
By the way, I do appreciate when you guys ask questions. I think it really, really helps in the sense that I know some things you may not be clear on, or it through talking about it helps us to sort of clarify things better. So please don't ever hesitate to ask questions. And some of you have asked questions during the week, especially related to the foregrounding and de-automatization. And I've tried to reply to the question, but at the same time, I've also said it'll come up again today. We'll talk about it. All right, so next, what you should be working on. Now, I know you have your midterm test, but this will be due on the 10th. All right, week 8. I hope you've already been working on it. Transitivity analysis. When you think about transitivity, now I'm going to come back to that and talk about that, but in a sense, I want to address it with that sample question that was on the previous midterm test for another course, another class.
Sorry, I
Yes.
think there is some background noise out there. I feel like your voice was clearer before than this lecture, in the lectures before.
Let me see. Let me see. Microphone slipped down. Let's see if this helps. Does that help?
Yes, much, much greater. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you for mentioning that. Question from, I'll just address this on the chat. Is experiential theme equal to ideational topical theme? Yes, yes. It is, in fact. It's sometimes referred to as ideational theme, sometimes referred to as representational theme. In a way, experiential theme captures it a bit better in terms of the theory. Why? Because you're actually talking about an experiential element, all right? A process, participant, circumstance. When Halliday talks about the ideational metafunction, remember he sort of divides that into two subcomponents. One is the experiential and the other is the logical, right? So in fact, the experiential is more in tune with what we are talking about when we're saying the process or the participant or circumstance that you're putting first. All right, come back to this. Let's see, how are we doing? I'll let me go forward. All right. Sample question was, if we distinguish process types just on the basis of differences in meaning, one could argue that every verb is semantically different from every other. Halliday argues that the process types, material, mental, behavioral, existential, relational, and verbal, should instead be distinguished on the basis of grammar. Explain how Halliday distinguishes the various process types on the basis of grammar. What difficulties may arise in trying to apply Halliday's approach to distinguishing the various process types? Give examples to support your answer. All right, so this question is, I think, might be good to discuss in the context of the next step that I'm asking you to work on, and that is the transitivity analysis. So before I get to doing that, let me just sort of briefly go through what we've gone through before about the idea that when we talk about systems of choice, we're saying that language, one of the properties of language is that it is paradigmatic. There are categories. And when we come to looking at the experiential, we said there are various kinds of processes. There's a participant who initiates, there may be a participant who is affected, and there are circumstances. And when we said the process types, what types are there? How do we distinguish the process types? What you should be thinking about when you do that transitivity analysis is not just sort of, oh, I think that's more doing than thinking. That's not really the way you're supposed to go about it. Now, sometimes it's going to be quite obvious. You don't have to really test it to see. But if you were looking at what was a doing process, remember there were these sort of three kinds of questions that we could ask. Is it sort of substitutable by do? What did X do? What did X do to Y? What about the initiator of the action? Can it be human and non-human? Yes. Can it project? Can it take a that clause? No, it cannot. So that is how we distinguished doing processes. Halliday calls them material processes. We contrasted that with mental processes, and we said that in a mental process, you cannot ask that question, what did X do? So you say, what did X do? John saw the bird. If you answer like that, your answer seems to be not relevant to the question that was asked. What did John do? He saw the bird. No, it doesn't fit, because you're asking something about doing when you're really answering it with something that is about sensing. And so it would be taken as being sort of an odd kind of answer. It doesn't match up because the processes are, we think of them as different. The mental processes you don't substitute by do. The initiator must be human or human-like, have a sense of consciousness. It can project, it can take a that clause. We went down and we took the verbal processes, all right? So we found, how is a verbal process different than a mental process? Both can project, but we could see that the clock thinks it's time to leave. No, the clock tells me it's time to leave. Yes, because the initiator of a process of speaking, of saying, can in fact be non-human. Can it be substitutable by do? Well, if it's like one participant, John told a joke. What did John do? He told the joke. But you can't say, what did John do to the joke? He told it. That seems very, again, an odd kind of question and answer. And the last one that I compared with, because I didn't cover behavioral and existential. Behavioral, let me get to that in a moment. First, relational. Again, it can take a that clause in some circumstances. It can be non-human or human, not substitutable by do. And so we said basically there were these three questions that could be asked. Now, what about behavioral? If the behavioral is something like sleeping, can I ask the question, what is Tom doing? He's sleeping. Sure. Then is it a material process? The one who is sleeping must have sort of it's a kind of behavior, though. It's Halliday distinguishes it. And in many ways, what we find is that it is the single participant processes that would be considered behavioral as opposed to material. Halliday suggests that for a behavioral process, again, it should be the initiator is some human or human-like with a sense of consciousness, again, like a mental process, engaged in some kind of behavioral activity. So he makes a distinction between them, between behavioral and material. What he's suggesting is that behavioral is sort of, again, a combination of material and mental. But you're saying these lines seem to be getting fuzzier and fuzzier. But that is the nature of language. That is the nature of language. We don't have real clear sort of logical sort of categories that are all nicely put together and all very, very deliberately kept separate. No, we don't. Sure, if I want to distinguish think, it's an obvious sensing kind of verb. Hitting, obviously a doing kind of thing. Some of the processes are so obvious. But then that's why when Halliday got to sort of the sleeping and the coughing, it seemed like those were not really necessarily just doing it. It seemed to be a sort of a combination of both the qualities of what you expect in a mental process and a behavioral process. Can a behavioral process project? No, it cannot. Just like a material process. Existential. I didn't say much about that. It is, you can see it in the example that we just were looking at. There are, there's, all right, there I said is the existential theme. And what Halliday argues is that the verb to be here is not just a relational process, it's an existential process. Now, why are we doing this? And that's why at the very beginning, I gave that illustration, Donald Jung's speech, and tried to show that it did reflect on how he sees and construes the world, right? And it was reflective, the fact that his doing is not done by people. But when we looked at Susan Rice, the fact that her doing is done primarily by people, reflected a different way in which they see the world. So the process types, it is significant to sort of identify them as far as we can and identify who is in the ER role, who is the initiator, who is affected. When you are going to be doing your analysis of the text that you're working on, this is something you need to be paying attention to. All right, now let me, I think it's time for a break. We'll take a break now. We come back, it'll be 8:05, and I'm going to go through with you my transitivity analysis of the puff text. All right. Now, if you have been downloading my model analysis, I changed it today. And as I've been preparing the lecture, been going over things, and now I think I'm quite happy with what there is. And I have uploaded the new sort of model, and that's what I'm going to be going through when we come back. All right, so let's come back at 8:05, please. Okay, so see you then. Okay, let's go through this analysis of the puff text. And again, this is what I'm hoping you will be doing with your Pookie text. All right. It starts off quite uniformly relational. I have two facts for you. I'm going to highlight on the box, all right, that I put the text in. You can compare if you want with what's in the Excel file that I've also displayed on the screen. And I've gone through it as far as I can tell. I've correctly indicated in there both are aligned together. One thing though, I do indicate the participant in the ER role and in the ED role. All right. So I have two facts and circumstances for you. All right. I'm 6 feet tall. I'm not going to go through in the ER role and the ED role. I think you can see that here. I'm mainly going to be focusing on the type of process. But I do want you to add the information like you see in the Excel file. Treat that as the model. Love is and one will ever have. So it's all relational to begin with. And then sentence 4, it switches. Now, again, may I make this clear? We are analyzing all of the verbs. And so we are not leaving out the non-finite clauses like we did with theme. All right. Here we are doing all the verbs, even if they're included in clauses that are embedded or rank shifted. Learn. Well, how do I take it as a mental process? If I had any doubts about it, then I'd ask myself, learn, can it take a that clause? I learned that John is going. All right, so it can take a that clause. And what can learn must have sense of human self. It must have a sense of consciousness, all right? Human like. To hold on is I'm taking sort of as a phrasal verb. Leaves as, again, a process, a doing process, and exiting also a doing process. 5A was brought to this earth. Do take note if it's the passive voice. All right, so you can look up in 5A on the Excel file, and the material process was brought. An angel, remember, is not the ER role, it's in the ED role. All right, so if it's passive voice, even though it's the subject, it is in the ED role. So pay attention to that. No, should be no disagreement about that. Is relational process. Glimmer, I took as sort of behavioral, all right? Again, it doesn't, it's a one single participant process. It does sort of, it's how her eyes behave, all right? They glimmer. So that's why I've put it as a behavioral process. I got that sort of in the wrong color. All right, she is my world. It's a relational process. All right, sorry about that. 8 is, it's a relational process, not mental, of course not. 9, learned. We already looked at that. Meant to mean something. I meant that, so we can take a that clause. To love, I take as also a mental process. You can love someone. It's, but you wouldn't say, "What are you doing?" I'm loving someone. All right. It's again, it's something that would be mental. Was relational, seeing, mental. Make, obviously, kind of doing. Fly.
Fly, well, is that behavioral or is it material? This I sort of was debating with myself. And in the end, I put it as material doing. Uh, Arguably, you could say fly as a kind of behavior. All right. So it's arguable. All right. I'm not going to pretend that it's so straightforward and all clear cut. That was sort of the nature of the question I asked in that test was, yes, we have these sort of uh, test questions. What did X do? What did X do to Y? And who can be the initiator? Who can be the affected? But sometimes it isn't very clear. All right, the kind of distinction. Now, from 11 onwards, it seems that it's all a kind of doing. I've been ground bound, left, go, left to leave someone, all right? And these are passive voice, all right? This I took as quite, I've been ground bound. In other words, he isn't the initiator, he isn't in control. She left Earth, all right? But he was left here. In other words, in both 11, I've been ground bound, passive voice. 12, passive voice. I was left here. So in all of these, he's not the initiator. And that really noticeable change here. And remember, it's after 10 when it gets to this but. And now we're faced with his experience of the death of his sister. Switching of the voice, I think, is purposeful, deliberate, making a change. Manufacture. Haunted, is that mental? Well, I've thought about that, and you can't project with it. It can't be a projected clause, right? Haunt that. All right, so that does seem to be, that's why I put it back as a material doing process. The relational processes to be, to have, those are obvious. Whoosh, clearly mental. The rest, I think, are quite obvious here. Care, is that caring for someone? Now, you again, do you notice that verb, to care for someone? It couldn't be in the sense of taking care of somebody. Suppose someone had an elderly parent and they were caring for them, doing things for them, right? But here, what is the meaning? Caring for someone. It's not doing something for them, it's what you think about them. So, in this sense, but can care take that clause? He cares that you are sick. Ah, yes, it could. It could. So, in a way, that 14b caring, I really could be, should be probably thinking of it in more as a mental process. Do you see sort of the process of thinking things through here? You immediately see it caring, and you got to realize there's more than one meaning. And here it's caring for, it's like loving someone, right? So in a way, it comes across as more mental, and then you have to ask yourself those questions. And at first, you think, can it take a that clause? Uh, Depends on the meaning. So in a way, caring should be like a mental process, and imagine also should be a mental process. I'm just looking at my colors. I think sometimes I mixed up the colors here. All right. Uh, what have I've been using mental up and, oh boy. Sorry about that. A bit, I got mixed up in between what I was thinking was relational was red, and it's not. It should have been mental. Refer to the Excel file. All right. Sorry about that. I got mixed up with the colors as I was going through it. All right. So imagine mental. staring at the grave, that I took as behavioral. And the other one, living, also I'd take as behavioral. Live, to die, these are behavioral. All right. I'm sorry, I really messed up the color scheme here. All right. So trade, hold on, leaves, exit, got left, those would be definitely material. And no, regret, these would be obviously mental. Sorry about that. I've got refer to the table, refer to the Excel table, please. The color scheme. I'll try to fix that before I upload the corrected PowerPoint for you. All right. So dealt with the first question. Think about in the sense of it. Obviously, the test will not be about process types. I'll tell you that frankly. But it could be other things that would be, for example, that we have been also looking at in terms of the kinds of grammatical structures, perhaps related to theme. No more is to be said on that one. All right, come back. Week 8, second sample question. The theoretical approach pioneered by M.A.K. Halliday is called systemic functional linguistics. Why systemic? Why functional? Explain how these two terms serve to distinguish Halliday's approach to the study of language as compared with more formal approaches, such as has been put forward by Noam Chomsky. Text is choice. Text represents a selection within numerous sets of options. The paradigmatic property that we just talked about, the choice of what kind of process type to use. At the same time, Halliday is saying everything that is said presupposes a background of what might have been said but was not. In other words, you're making a choice, but it's also the choices you didn't make. What is a text? A text then is a semantic structure. Again, a distinction is made by Halliday between the clause. The clause, Halliday says, is a lexicogrammatical unit. The text, he's saying, is a semantic unit. A text is made up of clauses. The clauses carry the lexicogrammar. That's where we have transitivity. That's where we identify theme. That's where we identify the logical structure. It's there within the clauses. How those messages then combine together contribute to making up the text as a whole. And that text, though, has to be understood and interpreted as a whole. A text is a semantic structure that is formed out of a continuous process of choice among innumerable interrelated sets of semantic options. Where is that realized? Where are those choices realized? At the level of the clause. What do we mean? We mean the choice of transitivity, process, participant, circumstance. Choice of theme, how you begin each clause. Now, the total set of choices, meaningful choices of what you're saying, that's the meaning potential. So the options that you have, the ideas that you're going to express, the nature of those connections between the ideas, the messages, the choices that you make about how the information will flow through the discourse, this is all part of the meaning potential. And that's why it isn't systematic. It isn't like what Chomsky considers to be the nature of language, that it's logical. It is more, as we've said, analogical. Because we speak as we have been spoken to. We speak on the basis of what we have heard. And so on that basis, we form analogically, resembling what we have heard. putting our language together. Not systematic, it is systemic. Systemic in the sense that it is made up of systems of choice. And how those relate one to the other, nature of systemic, systems of choice, sets of semantic options. We've said that the semantics here means what kind of meaning there is, and that we have choices related to representational, ideational. Someone just asked, what about experiential? So you got the idea now. When Halliday talks about ideational, he's talking about something that he says is made up of both the experiential and the logical. We have interpersonal, we have the textual. So we have the three meta functions. Meta functions because what we're saying is that every language has to have a way to construe experience. Every language has to have a way to enact relationships. Every language has to have a way to materialize the text, create the discourse. And so, yes, language makes meaning. How it does so is through the grammar. Thinking about meaning means thinking grammatically. What does that mean? What is Halliday meaning by thinking grammatically? Does he mean, whether you've got the right subject-verb agreement, whether you're using the appropriate tense, whether you're using the appropriate pronoun? No. No. When he says thinking about meaning means thinking grammatically, what he's saying is that what you're looking at is not just the meaning, but you're looking at the wording. And when he talks about the wording, yes, you have a choice about how you're going to construe the world, how you're going to experience it. But how does that get realized? Thinking about meaning means thinking grammatically. Kind of process you're going to choose. Who will be initiating that process? Who will be affected by it? And that's why we saw that in the case of the distinction between Donald Jung and Susan Rice. Yes, their choices about how they're going to represent meaning, how they're going to realize meaning, is going to be realized through choices they're making, options, kind of process, who initiates. Interpersonal, what kind of mood type? Am I giving information? Am I receiving? Do I want you to do something for me? What's my attitude? Am I confident and I'm certain, or I'm unsure? Modality. Textual, how is the message organized? Theme. Thematic progression. The other aspect, though, to keep in mind is that language doesn't occur in isolation. It's not just as though language is by itself. It occurs in context. Now, Halliday's mentor was J.R. Firth. And so Halliday was very, very much influenced by J.R. Firth. And for him, systemic meant the discovery of systems of language and culture realized in the dialogic text in a specific context of situation. Do you know what that means? How do you know what are the systems of language and culture? Except by means of the text. What is the text? The text is the dialogue. Text is the exchange of meaning in a specific context of situation. Text in context. Out of that, we can discover then what are the systems, what are the options that are available. You see, it's discovering, it's looking at the meaning and then looking at the forms that convey, that realize that meaning. And then when we talk about context, what are we referring to? What is being talked about? The nature of the content. It relates to the experiential metafunction. Who is talking to whom? It relates to the interpersonal, but you also have to think about it from the standpoint of who is talking to whom. That's part of the context, but that's going to be also realized through language in terms of the interpersonal metafunction. How is the activity taking place? Are you tweeting it? Or are you writing a 700-word essay? Well, the textual metafunction is very much going to be different depending on which. Remember Hassan, and I discussed this very early on in the course. What is the relationship then between text and context? And Hassan talks about the context metafunction hookup hypothesis. What's the relation between the context and the way in which we use language? What she's saying is this, that how you perceive the context will activate certain choices of meaning. Likewise, the way you use language is going to give us some idea of how you understand the context. It works both ways. In other words, if you are talking to me, I'd be, besides getting the content of what you're saying, I'd also be from that exchange drawing conclusions about how you see the context in which we're talking. Is it informal? Is it formal? What is the relationship between the two that are speaking? We make up, we interpret not just the meaning, but we also interpret what's going on, who's talking to who, how is it taking place. What she's saying is that, she goes on to say, related to that, is that out of that, depending on the context, there will be a way of speaking that fits that context, and that will belong to some register. Concept, what is a register? What is a register? It is something, it is the use of language, meaning word choices, as she says, activated by context of situation. There is a correlation between the way you speak and the context in which you're speaking. So that every time you're speaking, it is an example of some register. Eric Steiner talks about, and Eric Steiner, leading linguist in terms of systemic functional linguistics, at the same time very much interested in the application of SFL to translation studies. And I've given you this quote before: register becomes a key organizing concept linking context and lexicogrammar. As he puts it, something which to my knowledge is not found anywhere else in modern linguistics. You see, you can't be talking about text linguistics without thinking about, why do you study text? You study text to understand language, because what is language except the text? But you cannot just study text in isolation. You must look at text in the context in which it takes place. Logical. We looked at what is logical meaning. I've said you go back, you look at the metafunctions. It is listed under representational, ideational, the logical. How are the messages? Now, I want to use these two words, and it's deliberate. What is a clause? A clause is a message. You get it? So we're sort of using them as like synonyms of each other. And a text is made up of messages, made up of clauses. Now, how are those clauses combined with each other? Dependent clauses. How are the clauses combined? We've said it's a relationship of parataxis, hypotaxis. We've talked about this, and we looked at, and you could not possibly have understood the discussion of, for example, Edwin Tumbu's poetry without understanding parataxis and hypotaxis. Of course, the question that some of you have asked, hypotaxis, what is the difference between that and rank shifting? And the point that we've made is that when you look at a rank shifted clause, the difference between these two, we indicate it by punctuation, correctly by punctuation, with a comma that says those are two separate clauses, one clause giving more information about the other. One is the main clause, one is the dependent clause, one is the alpha, one is the beta. Someone asked me, what's the alpha and the beta mean? Well, the alpha, remember we've said, is that main clause. It's that main idea. It is the core. It is the one to which the beta points. It makes a difference. Yes, the notion of hypotactic and rank shifted is completely different. Different how? As we've said, it would make a difference in terms of how you answer that question. How many brothers do I have? If it is hypotaxis, how many brothers do I have? One. I'm just giving you that information, that extra information about my one brother. He's studying here. But rank shifted, we call it a restrictive relative clause. Some call it a defining relative clause. And how many brothers do I have? More than one. And I'm telling you which one. So the whole nature, parataxis and hypotaxis, they are connections between clauses. Rank shifting is where one clause is embedded inside of another clause, and its rank is no longer like a clause. It's part now like of a phrase, noun phrase, a group of words. And so we made that distinction between paratactic and hypotactic. I hope that's clear to you, and I hope you can see the difference between parataxis, hypotaxis, embedding, rank shifting. The relationships then this will be very important when we go on to the next step and do the logical analysis. I won't be giving you a question about logical meaning on the test, because I don't feel we've really covered it yet in the detail that I'd like to before you begin having to discuss it. Because we haven't gotten to that analysis yet in looking at the text, I won't be asking you a question about logical meaning, but you should know what those terms mean, okay? And its importance and its significance. And I illustrated it with the speeches that Obama gave. And you remember that even though so complex that last sentence, it was the patterning, the pairing, as we take, as we learn. And then as we learn, that the struggles, that the hopes, pair, and then another pair, 2 layers, and all of that hypotactically related to the main clause. We will remember, we will begin. So clearly by design. But what is by design? The logical structuring. It is part of the options. It is among the options you're choosing, paratactic or hypotactic. as I said, looking at Edwin Tumbu's poetry, when you look at Gods Can Die, what was the sort of background? What was sort of the common kind of structure? Paratactic. Where did it stand out? Where was it foregrounded? The hypotactic. And then take the next poem, David. What was the background? The hypotaxis. What was the foreground? The parataxis. The poet is using these structures, these resources, as a way to draw out patterns. And on the basis of that, create sort of a default, an automatization against which to foreground. And here, though, the patterning is also contributing to the way in which he will then speak it, giving it a sense of rhythm, a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. That is Obama's structuring, and the logical structuring of it is done in such a way as to contribute to his ability to speak it out in a way that has almost a quality of music. The interpersonal, mentioned about mood structure and so forth, and that this should be elementary material, all right? What is mood structure, the subject and the finite? In that order, of course, making a statement. Switch them around, you're asking a question. Take them away, you've got an imperative. The attitude of the speaker. I had a question here. Good question. I will come to it back in a moment. Let me finish this part first. Interpersonal. What is the attitude of the speaker? Modality. And again, I gave you that illustration from Obama, the should. Who can say that? In what you have to be in a position of authority to be telling someone what they should do. It tells the relationship, but it also expresses will, confidence, determination. That's what's coming through here. Before I go on to the textual, let me respond to the question. I think it's, in fact, it was just sent to me, but the question was this, from one of your classmates asked, why do teachers not teach SFG in school? I don't know. Yes, I do think it would make a big difference. And where it has been tried, for example, in Australia, because Halliday's influence was quite great in Australia, it's been tried in Canada, in British Columbia, in various places. People have caught on to the fact that, yes, it can give us some insight into how we use language, and for the student to realize that these are the resources that are available. And that's what I'm hoping you all are beginning to see too. And realizing the resources that you are using, and realize the resources that are available there for you to use in language that can contribute to getting the response that you want to get from your audience. See, someone like in the spoken word performance that we've been looking at, the poets that we've been looking at, they are the masters of their craft. And the nature of their craft, the resources that they use are the kinds of things that we've been trying to sort of take apart here and show what those are. That's the point of what we've been doing. And that's what I hope that, I hope what you'll take away from this course is a realization of, when you look at some kind of language that's there, I'm not saying you're going to look at a lot of poetry from here on, but even in your own writing and looking at how the writing is used in a way to be able to have the response, get the response, get the audience to value your text the way you want it valued. All right, textual. A few more minutes before we go head for break. The textual. This, I think, you should be quite clear on. You've done the analysis. We've talked about theme and so forth. I think by now you've got the idea what's involved. What does it mean to talk about theme? So take these apart. What is it? What is the starting, the departure point of the message? How is theme the starting departure point? Of course, it's how you begin the clause, right? It's what the speaker wants to talk about. We notice that typically it's information that's already known. It's what it's about. It orients the clause within the context. By context here, meaning in the sense of what you have said, and that relates to the thematic progression. Finally, it relates to the method of development of the text. What's the difference between theme and focus? The theme is the initial grammatical element. Probably better to say this, the first experiential element. There should be no doubt in your mind now about what is an experiential element. What is an experiential element? Process, participant, circumstance, right? And yes, the clause, you're going to express some process, participant, circumstance is going to be there. And which of these are you going to choose to start that message with? Besides the first experiential element, of course, you have, as we've said, textual, but merry, interpersonal. And how did you begin? How did you, when you did your theme analysis, what was the first thing you did? You looked for the first experiential element. And then anything that came before that, you looked at whether it serves a textual or some interpersonal function. What are special kinds of special thematic structures? Predication. You're telling the listener it's not what you were expecting. It's not old information, it's new information. I'm putting it at the beginning. Identification. Exclusively, this and this alone. You have to know those, in other words, in order to realize when you read them and when you see them within a text, why were they chosen? Were they chosen correctly? Linear thematic progression. How you choose from one clause to the next, from one message to the next. And we've looked at examples, and this one you're probably got it memorized by now, right? This one I've liked this example because it was just so clear. I mean, sometimes you probably think linguists sort of make up the sentences they have in order to fit what they're describing. But this one was a text. Someone wrote it as a journal article, and it was so obvious. First sentence, two clauses, and take the focus in each of them and then combine them as what turns out to be the beginning of the grammatical subject of the next sentence. And so 1A, extending their ranges toward the poles, becomes these range expansions. Populations have been migrating, developing, reproducing earlier in the spring than previously. Changes in the timing of seasonal events. Do you see the flow there? Took the new information from 1A and the new information from 1B and put them both together there at the beginning of 2. That's how we expect when we're looking at a text. That makes it easier to follow because we feel that that is the information is flowing. New becomes the old, and new becomes the old, and so forth. Of course, yes, we said if a text is comparing, contrasting, then continuous thematic progression. We looked at it in the sense of those Obama-Romney debates, and we were comparing, we noticed that, and what I was suggesting to you, my hypothesis for why Obama did poorly in the first debate and so much better in the third debate, why he got these results and why people criticized his first debate performance had to do with the choices of theme. That in the first debate, the closing statement so diffuse, all spread out, so many different things mentioned as theme. In the third debate, he narrowed it down to I and we. He made the connection. And we said that that connection that he made, again, I'm going to skip these because I've been through them with you already. That connection was in his eyes. I'm sure that whoever is coaching him for the debates made the point that you are not making a connection with your audience, either by your language or by your facial gesture, your eyes. And so that's why in the third debate, that closing statement was all about making that connection. I, we, not about other things. Why systemic? Because what we're talking about are choices. You're making choices, and they come in sets. Those sets we're calling systems. The choices are paradigmatic. This is the property of language. And that's why Halliday then represents it as sort of a system network. And as I said previous times, what is captured here, yes, you see experiential, interpersonal, textual. Textual, choices of theme. Interpersonal, choices of mood type. Experiential, choice of process type. It's all three, right? You're making choices from the set of process types. You're making choices from the set of mood type. You're making choices from the set of possible themes. All of it together. At the same time, that's the and. You're also making or choices. Among the process types, you material or mental or verbal or relational. And so language is a system, are systems of choice, and those choices are and choices. Some you make concurrently, some of them are alternatively. But then Halliday talked about the nature of language as probabilistic. You see, it goes back to that. And if you make it up like this and you say those are the choices that you have, then it looks so fixed. It looks so static. No room for change to it. No. How do you indicate change? Change not just in the you want to change the network, but change in the sense of the language changes. The language is constantly evolving, constantly changing. How do you incorporate this into the network? Yes, this way of representing it is the paradigmatic property of language. But you want to represent the fact that as you make those choices, something is changing. What is changing? What's changing are the probabilities that you choose that. What does that mean? The probability that you, in that context of situation, choose to express it in that particular way. language is related. But at the same time, language is also changing. How do we understand? In other words, you can't really see system, lang. Those are abstractions. Those are generalizations. All you can really see are the instances of language. But the occurrence of those choices, the choices that you make, those form the system of language. So that's why we take this simple stratification here. Yes, you have semantics and you have grammar, and they're connected. But you also have the idea that language is also instantial. It is as you use language. But as you use language, that becomes the way of speaking. The meaning making becomes the meaning potential. And you have these connections which, over time, with use, become the system itself. And the easiest analogy for this is the climate and weather. Remember that? You go outside now, that's the weather, that's the temperature, etc. That's the instance. But it's based on year after year after year what you would expect the weather to be like given the first day of March. You have an expectation. You form some judgments based on the probabilities that have been occurring after all the time. All these frequencies add up to the probabilities that it will be this kind of temperature, this kind of weather. That's the climate. So I really like Halliday's idea. Climate is a theory of the weather. Yeah, right? As I said, long, system, these are theoretical concepts, theory. They're abstractions. You can't say systemic functional grammar has no theory. No. There is theory. The theory is made up of these systems of choice. The nature of language that you're describing is paradigmatic, probabilistic. So how then do you get to know what is language? Language is the system of meaning potential. It is a theory, but it is a theory of the text. That's what language is. It's a theory of the text. You cannot get at language without first studying the text. That's what it is, text linguistics. It's not just engaging in kinds of analysis of lots of texts. It is getting at the nature of language. So Halliday's suggesting that if you do corpus linguistics, and some of you I know that interests you, well, Halliday was one of the pioneers of this. And this was before there was nice corpora out there in which he had to collect all the data himself. And what he found was the probabilities that if you, in the text that he was looking at, past versus non-past, half-half. And non-past, present versus future, 9-1. Present, 9 times out of 10. 1 time maybe future. Now, that was the corpus that he looked at. Now, Halliday makes the point that what if his corpus was weather forecasting? You know, you see on TV, these people report the weather. Now, what kind of tense do you think they use? Mostly future. So the ordering will be different depending on what you're talking about, depending on the context. So yes, the probabilities do adjust. depending on those, what we talked about before, field, tenor, mode. So what Halliday's point is that each utterance that you hear and you produce changes these probabilities. These are changing all the time. We looked at an example, and I do think this example is so interesting about how language changes, right? And the nature of that. And I remember growing up, it was intransitive and transitive verbs. But as we've seen, this is changing. And there's a new type, a third type. It is either transitive, to participant, or intransitive. Halliday maintains it's a difference in how you look at reality. It's how you construe experience. In two participant process, transitive, you're saying that there's an actor who's doing something, and it extends from the actor to the goal. But in the single participant, you're only talking about the affected, not the initiator. It's just the affected. So the glass broke. The glass is the affected. The transitive, you're talking about the actor, broke the glass. It's a difference in whole orientation. These aren't, as we've said, the intransitive, those aren't passive voice. No. It is a single participant, not passive. And what we've said is that, in fact, the language is moving in that direction where it is becoming less this dichotomy between most transitive and most intransitive. Instead, those verbs that are used more often are likely to become either two or one participant. Language is changing, it's evolving. And this was one of the points that Halliday made in that lecture, language evolving. He made an interesting comment in that, and that was meanings packaged as a succession of bite-sized chunks. I mentioned before, if you were tweeting, as opposed to if you were writing a 700-word essay, what do you think would be the differences between in terms textually? What Halliday is saying is the interpersonal likely becomes more explicit. The textual becomes less explicit, almost just like the subtitles. Are we sort of losing out on thoughtful discourse? The nature of our technologies changing the way we use language, changing, and by doing so then the way we relate one to the other through our language. Trump, remember how he uses language, how he tweets. So the properties, systems of meaning, paradigmatic, probabilistic. What is a text? Remember these features: cohesion, coherence, intentionality, acceptability, informativeness, situationality, intertextuality. Do you know what each of these is? What's cohesion? We talked about reference, substitution. I'm not going to go into great detail here. It's in the lecture, and we've talked about it. Cohesiveness is a kind of patterning. Coherence, something else. That is how you sort of are seeing the text form into sort of an architecture. Remember the metaphor that I've used here, that cohesiveness is like the texture, the coherence is like the architecture. It all boils down to the intention of the writer. What is the intention? What is the purpose? That goes back to, why do we talk about systemic functional? Because it comes down to the purpose to which you are going to put language. Responding to a text, a reader must be willing to accept the text as a text. What makes it for an acceptance of the text? Well, first of all, it must be informative. It will depend on the situation, viewed in context of situation. And the last one, intertextuality. Viewed in relation to other texts, in view of how we use language. Roland Barthes, text is a new tissue of past citations, bits of code, formulae, rhythmic models, fragments of social languages pass into the text and are redistributed within it, for there's always language before and around the text. Language, we use it depending on our purpose. And when it was right help, remember, we noticed that you had all those imperatives. Well, you don't have a lot of imperatives in a lot of other aspects of language, but you do here, because that's what you want, the reader wants. That's what they want to give the reader, and that is instructions, step by step, what actions to take. We looked at David Foster Wallace's This is Water and noticed how the text itself has an architecture. It sort of divides, and how it divides we can see in terms of choices of patterning, in terms of the type of verb. It was about thinking, and this is what gradually mental processes became more predominant. But it also had to do with the choice of theme. The first part was the activity, the mundane activity, routine activity done by you. The second part was how this can be viewed so negatively, and their first person, he takes that negativity on himself. At the same time, at the very end, trying to move you to think. And so we see how the choice of theme, how the choice of process combines together. You know, I sometimes in a question ask you for examples. Go back, look at the examples. What have they been illustrating? Talked about cohesiveness as texture, architecture as coherence. We talked about rhetorical structure theory, representing that architecture of the text. The properties of rhetorical structure theory. Why do we need rhetorical structure theory when we've got systemic functional grammar? Because what was the focus of Halliday's systemic functional grammar? The realization lexicogrammatically, where? In the clauses. The how do we understand the text as a whole? If the text as a whole is this semantic unit, how do we represent that? And that's where rhetorical structure theory comes in. The relations that exist between the parts that make up a text. We looked at an example, and I'll just go through this example with you again, just to remind you. In that email that Obama's team sent out to ask for money, we looked at how you could represent, looking at the structure here, we can. But we noticed that each of these broke down into we can or we can. 24, we can or we can. 25, we can or we can. We looked at how you could analyze this and notice that it sort of had that structure across each of these. Was it paratactic? No, we suggested, in fact, when you looked at it, it wasn't, because, in fact, the alternatives were not equal. One side was favored over the other. That's because you're looking at the text. If you're looking at the text simply grammatically, please follow this. If I was looking at the text just grammatically and I just was saying or, I'd say there's paratactic. But if I'm going to take a look at the text semantically, I'm going to realize that these alternatives are not equal. One of them favored Obama. One of them favored Hillary Clinton. And because they're for Obama, what's said for Obama is good, and what's said for Hillary Clinton is bad, negative. So they weren't equal. The nature of the text is not like this, but instead like this. It really is a relationship of antithesis. Now notice the antithesis. What was the definition of antithesis? Is there anything about the lexicogrammar here? No. The nucleus. Writer has positive regard for the situation presented in the nucleus. The nucleus and the satellite, they're in contrast. Yes, they're in contrast. They're alternatives, but the writer has positive regard for the situation presented in the nucleus. The definition of the relation, antithesis or antithesis, the definition is semantic, because you are dealing with the text and what it means. It's an important concept I want you to be clear on. We say that the text is the semantic unit, must be analyzed in terms of its semantics. In that case, then, we would say this was not a correct analysis, but this reflected more the nature of the difference between the various parts. So that's why do we need rhetorical structure theory? Because we're looking at the text and the relations that exist between the parts of a text that are defined semantically. We looked at an example of Murder on the Orient Express. We looked at how basically we could map out its rhetorical structure quite easily. The use of existential processes, and it shifted. And the example that I gave here, there was right, there was wrong, there was a continuous, there is, but then broken by the use of the tense. It's not poetry, but the drama itself was written in such a way as to be able to foreground the fact that there was right, there was wrong. And then switching, remember, now there is you. And the theme then choices became you. The choice of theme itself was giving you an idea as to the structure of the text. Why? Because one part is there are, the existential there, and then shifts so obviously, so dramatically to you. There was right, there was wrong, now there is you. And that becomes the theme that follows. The choices that are being made in terms of theme, the choices that are being made tell us how the text is put together. And in this case, for this Murder on the Orient Express, we said there was a shifting in prominence from the ideational to the interpersonal, from the rational to the irrational. The agitation is expressed in his voice. Do it, the imperative. Other examples that we looked at, again, I won't go through all these in detail. We have gone quite over. If you don't mind, I want to keep going. I don't know how you all feel, but I do want to cover everything, and if you don't mind, I'd like to keep going. Is that okay with you all? Okay, so I will keep going. If you need to take a break, go ahead. Anyways, the video you can see later. I want to, if I can, get through the material that I want to present to you, and then after that, if there's time, also allow you to ask questions. But I do encourage you, as I'm speaking, please just feel free to speak up. Feel free to say, you know, I don't get that. I don't understand that. This was the illustration I was making here, was the structure here and of Hu Jintao's speech, if you remember, how the theme played an important role. Good grief, if I asked you for examples to show how theme plays a role in the development of the text, this would be an ideal example, right? He says our cooperation as partners. That's how paragraph 5 ends, and then 6, 7, 8, and 9 all begin. Very obvious linear thematic progression, and then the repetition of theme identifies all that 6, 7, 8, and 9 quite symmetrically, quite paratactically, all elaborating on what that cooperation should be. The choice of theme here, in the sense that when paragraph 3, over the past 32 years, circumstance, when, as we enter the second decade of the 21st century, when, as we said, the way in which these speeches are typically put together, it's an emphasis on the history. And how do you get to the history? The chronology. And the chronology means you're probably going to put the circumstance there first. Typically, that's how these speeches, what they look like. Honestly, when you look at these sort of speeches that are given by state leaders, when they would be at the welcoming, they almost always follow a template. There's an expectation. What is that template? That template is the register. You remember that word? The register. It's the way you use language. There is an expectation for how you should use language. So when you have a speech like a state visit, and this world leader comes and is giving the speech, there's almost a template that they follow. I looked at not only Hu Jintao, the French president, again, the same kind of thing. When Obama gives his speech, the same kind of thing. See, that was one reason why, honestly, Trump had difficulty, because he didn't know the register. He'd never been within that sort of, that context before. He was used to a different context. He was used to a different way of speaking. And he comes into this without that sort of awareness. And that's why people respond. Now, some people responded positively. Here's someone that doesn't talk like a politician. And you had others, though, that, wow, he doesn't know how to. Kind of politician is he? People will respond to it. Now, what is metaphor? You talked about this, and I discussed with you different ways of looking at it, from Russell Mears, the emeritus professor of psychiatry. Remember, I really do like this book. It's an excellent book, and I mentioned it several times. But I do encourage you, if you wanted to get one book to read, to sort of give yourself an awareness of language that's not written by a linguist, this would be an excellent choice. It talks about metaphor, picture making, taking a kind of reality. It's at the heart of relationships. It's unique to the human primate. It's there as it's necessary for the creation of culture, and it allows us to be able to say that which cannot otherwise be said. Question had come up before, metaphor. What is metaphor? We've distinguished three types of metaphor. Lexical metaphors, the typical, what usually people think of when you talk about metaphor. But there's another quality of metaphor, which we said is a grammatical metaphor, where what we're doing is we're sort of changing the expectations. In a way, what are you doing? I'm going to use a word here. We've used it in connection with poetry, but it's equally appropriate here. De-automatization. That's what the metaphor is. What is the automatic? The automatic is what Halliday calls the relation of congruence. It's saying things are nouns. Qualities are adjectives. Processes are verbs. That is the default. That is the automatic. That is the congruent. That's how you grow up talking. It's that's the connection between meaning and wording. And so we sort of couple it together, but then the fact that we can recouple it, we can decouple it, first of all, processes not as verbs, but instead change that process as a noun. And when you do that, you're giving it the quality of nounness, which means that it is then like a thing. It has the semantic properties. Grammatical properties, yes, but also the semantic properties. You have taken the default and you've changed it. And in that metaphor making, you have done what is de-automatization. De-automatization means that you take what is the direct realizational way of the grammar, expressing the meaning, and changing it. Freeing up the meaning and the wording. You free them up. You now can reorganize it. And in that reorganization, you are creating metaphors. Grammatical metaphors. Becomes a way to innovate at the level of grammar, not the level of words. And it becomes the way in which science has become so accustomed to taking a happening and turning it into a something so they can now talk about it. At the same time, you'll remember in the speech that Donald Jung gave, on the one hand, you could see what he's saying here as being sort of rather paratactic at one level, at another level. But it's not. On one level, at that one level, you can read. It's possible. And read is mental. Well, that's really not very definite. All right, you can read. He could say at another level, it reminds us, which would have been almost about the same, but he doesn't. Instead, he changes the remind, the verb to remind. He changes it, instead of saying it reminds us, to it is a reminder. He took the verb itself, it became an object, it became a thing, it became something. It had substance. It existed. That is what's being done. It is that metaphorical quality that is being employed here. You're creating a metaphor using the grammar. That grammar is a new reality that it's not so simply, it reminds us, it is a reminder, it's something. And that changed the whole balance between these two at one level and at another level. What is a metaphor? Halliday talks about how it sort of evolves and changes from in child's speech, going from generalization to abstractness to metaphor. That Butt talks about it as that non-linear step. It is that step across. You're going in one direction, more abstract. And I'll never forget when I visited a university in China, and one of the staff there, one of the academic colleagues there, I said, I don't see it. He said, you're talking about something become more and more abstract, but when you change a verb into a noun, isn't that more abstract? So why is it a nonlinear step across? Why is it a different direction? It seems to me to be the same direction. And at first, honestly, I didn't see it myself. And I wondered, why does Halliday call this then this nonlinear step? And then it occurred to me, as it occurred to Professor David Butt, because we discussed this, and we discussed it with Halliday. Abstraction needs to be distinguished from mere abstractness, because what you're doing is you are leading, in fact, to the more concrete. It is a reminder. It's something that is concrete. That to me is amazing. That's mind-blowing. The fact that what we're doing in the world is the more abstract our thinking is, the more material, more concrete, the more less abstract our thinking. The more abstract our theorizing, the more concrete the world is becoming. It's all about things. That's such a twist. When Mears also talked about metaphor, he also talks about that nonlinear step to metaphor. What he's saying, it's like pattern matching. It's like comparing like with like. Until you get to metaphor, it's like with unlike. So what is metaphor? Metaphor is it is going against what you expect. It's going against the automatic. It's going against the default. It is the de-automatization. It is the paradoxical. So science moving in this direction because it wanted to make things stand still so it could measure it, so it could describe it. And so what Halliday's saying is that as that need arose, you had science, you needed to be able to sort of fix the world and make it static, and then be able then to really measure it and describe it, what's happening. To do that, you needed to change the dynamics from verbs into something that was static, nouns. You change the verbs into nouns. You're using the metaphor making potential that there is in language, the ability to de-automatize, the ability to change the congruent to the metaphorical. And it ends up then, they educated girls, and then conjunction. Women acquired the vote, changing the clausal, changing the way you see language, verbs and adjectives becoming nouns, conjunctions becoming verbs, changing the whole way we use language. The language is shifting, and these shifts, like we said, the instances become the system. Well, these shifts become the drift. It is the direction that language is moving. Language is changing. The instances become the system. The shift becomes the drift. The instances become the system. It is what we've been talking about. And so the language of science, and the language of science is a register. And what is that register? It is a special way of using language. What has evolved, says Halliday, as the scaffolding for scientific knowledge is a dedicated semiotic system, a register. Given scientists power over the environment, they can make the world stand still, create new virtual realities. At the same time, there's been a steady drift toward things. Things have been foregrounded. They have become the nature of our reality. You see, the point is that in terms of looking at when we look at, I just wanted to check the time. When we've been looking, I've been trying to repeat that word a few times, de-automatization, metaphor. Do you see it in the language of science? In the use of grammatical metaphor? What is metaphorical about it? It is taking a particular connection between semantics and grammar and recoupling it a different way so that processes now can be represented through nouns and then take on the qualities of nounness, becoming like things. That's grammatical metaphor. What's the third metaphor? The third metaphor is when we come to looking at the language of verbal art. The extended metaphor. This was the third question. Kaya Hassan believes that verbal art has a deeper meaning. This deeper meaning represents a hypothesis about some aspect of the life of social man. She explains how this deeper meaning is conveyed through a process which she calls symbolic articulation. Using an example of verbal art discussed in the class, whether a poem or a drama, explain how the poet or dramatist uses symbolic articulation to convey their hypothesis about some aspect of the life of social man. Familiarize yourself with the examples that we have been looking at. Very likely the questions I ask will say, use examples to illustrate. Examples drawn from class, drawn from the lectures. All right? So be thinking in those terms. Don't just think in conceptually, but thinking in terms of how these concepts are realized through the kinds of texts that we have been looking at. Hassan talks about two orders of meaning. This should be straightforward now. The semantics and grammar, phonology, the way we speak, and just that engagement with language is one level of meaning. But at another level, that other level is achieved through symbolic articulation. Articulating a symbol, articulating a metaphor, an extended metaphor. The poem itself takes on a metaphoric quality. How come? What makes for that metaphoric quality? It is through mobilizing the habitual patterns of language choice in a non-habitual consistency. The extended metaphor is produced through patterning, a patterning of choices. These patterns coalesce around a particular, be creating a particular background. against which the poet, the dramatist, spoken word performer foregrounds. Takes a pattern, creates the pattern, creates for that text an automatization, an automatic, a default choice of theme, a default choice of process type, a default choice of tense, a default choice of whether it's paratactic or hypotactic. You see, the choices are coming from the grammar and creating a pattern, taking the way you use language, using it with a non-habitual consistency. It's patterned. And that pattern is being used as the basis for which you will then repattern and foreground against it. And in the foregrounding against it, draw your attention to something the writer wants to say. The metaphor is within the choices of grammar that are made, extending across the text. Lexical metaphor is the word. Grammatical metaphor is a grammatical category. Extended metaphor extends across the text. It is almost, we might say, a textual metaphor. And the whole purpose is, it has a function, it has a purpose. It is to express what Hassan describes as some hypothesis about some aspect of the life of social man. The theme is the hypothesis. The patterns of language are deployed in such a way to take us in a particular direction. Each message is a message by itself. Think of message as a clause, right? The totality of these messages, the totality enunciates a theme. That theme is the metaphor. It is the extended metaphor. The theme becomes accessible by examination of what? The meaning of the individual messages. Yes, you look at each of the clauses, look at the grammatical choices that are made in those clauses. But then, guided by the repatterning of patterns, looking for the foregrounding, you discover the extended metaphor, the textual metaphor. Oh, it's as Mears says, it's not just about the words, it's about the wordings. It's not just the wordings, it's the text itself. Oh, please understand this term, de-automatization. It's not difficult. It is simply to say that there is an automatic. Yes, we know the automatic. And the poet creates an automatic. In science, what is the automatic? Where's the de-automatization? It's at the level of what's called grammatical metaphor. Changing the verbs into nouns is a kind of de-automatization. It's a kind of delinking. As it says at the bottom here, to de-automatize means to try to interpret the grammar in terms that go beyond its direct realizational function. Not what is the direct, not what is the expected. It's not in the poetry, it's not the first order of meaning. It is freeing up the grammar from the semantics. That's part of it. But it's going beyond that first order of meaning. It's going beyond that to a second order of meaning. And the way you get there is through creating another automatic, a patterning of which you will somehow contrast. Is artificially creating an automatization against which to de-automatize. Creating a pattern in order to break the pattern. Yes, of course, you will have some instances where you can say, oh, there's a pattern there. I see it repeated. And maybe it's not, though, part of the whole art. It's not part of the craft. It's not intentional. It's just by accident. That's why Hassan makes the point, foregrounding requires both contrast and consistency. We looked at examples, the widower in the country, choices of process type, and looking at it much like you will be looking at it in terms of transitivity analysis. We've been through this, and I mentioned several times the nature of the contrasts that are made here at levels of transitivity and logical and tense and theme. The point being that there was several patterns that were being created. The poem was basically talking about the widower, and so it was all very much related to the widower. And very first, I will do this, I will do that. Its tense is all future. The widower is the grammatical theme of each clause. The logical is this and this and this and this. It was very paratactic. That created a whole patterning against which the poet then contrasted. Where there was where there was foregrounding in terms of theme, choice of process, choice of use of logical devices. And on that basis, noting where these foregroundings all co-occurred, drawing your attention to the extended metaphor, the metaphor that the poet was trying to portray to you. That metaphor, that second order of meaning, that hypothesis about some aspect of the life of social man, the idea that we need others. A literary artifact is an extended metaphor. We looked at the use of language in verbal art, examples from Edwin Tumbu. Now I'm going to stop here. It's around 9:37. I'm going to ask, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask, rather than go over ground that I've just been mentioning recently about the poetry of Edwin Tumbu. And I mentioned in a moment ago what struck me is that, for example, Gods Can Die, I said that what was the background? Parataxis. What was foregrounding? The hypotaxis. He created a verbal sort of, he created an extended metaphor of the duality, where we've got two sides to us. But where the hypotaxis occurred was where that sort of negative side came out of his friend, where the humanistic impulses in him died. And then David, then he takes the hypotaxis becomes the background, the complex clauses, the highly patterned clauses. And then the simple parataxis is what is foregrounded. Foregrounded again to get across his idea of pain and joy in this life. But you are protected. That was the extended metaphor. Then when he gets to a poet reading, he goes on with all these, the choice of ing verbs, it's continuous, the choice of as a conjunction. This is mobilizing the patterns of choice in order to get across this idea of ongoing activity in poetry. And he creates patterns, so complex patterns that almost have a visual quality, which though has within each of it a flaw, an irregularity. Because the perfect poem is future tense. He creates the background of these very elaborate figures and use of language only to to break it, only to show the irregularity. The point is, the poet is using not just grammatical metaphor, not just lexical metaphors, but is using patterns from the language itself, the choices that are being made, the lexical grammatical choices from one clause to the next, to create a background, create a pattern against which to foreground, to tell you some message. The idea being, whether you're looking at the language of science or you're looking at the language of verbal art, it is all this ability, what makes it creative, what makes it innovative. You talk about creativity in verbal art, you talk about innovation in the language of science, but what creates that is this ability to create metaphor, the ability to de-automatize. That's it. That's the point of what we've been talking about. Appreciation that language isn't just one level, isn't flat. And that's what I'm hoping you will come across with and begin to see in this Pukki text. It's not just his mother being afraid for him. That's not just that first order meaning. Where is the art? What won people's attention? What attracted people? What aesthetically, what meaning-wise? That's what I hope you're beginning to look at as you do more analysis of that Pukki text. Well, I'm not hearing questions. You know, as I keep talking, I don't hear much by way. Does that mean you all are very confident and all ready?
Not really. I do
Huh?
have a question,
Okay, good.
Dr. Webster. So we were talking about extended metaphor, and this question may seem silly, but it comes to me. So the poets create a patterning, and then something is foregrounded against that patterning,
Yes.
and then that is the automatization. So
the automatization is the
yeah.
background, yes,
So
and the
what
foregrounding is the de-automatization, yes.
Yes, so I understand all of this, but what does all of this have to do with the word metaphor literally?
Because you're creating a kind of metaphor. When, for example, let me go back to the Edwin Tumbu's Gods Can Die. How does he create that sense of duality? How does he create that sense of that there's like two sides? He does it through the grammar, through choosing to pair words together, to use grammar in such a way that it's highly paratactic, right?
Yes.
He uses those, he creates that background of duality in order to be able then to foreground where that, as he says, where that those humanistic impulses are lost. Where are they lost? They're lost, and you can see it described where there's the hypotaxis. So the choices, the patternings themselves are what are creating the meaning. They create the metaphor, that sense of duality. It's not just words. It's not just even in a sense of a grammatical metaphor, grammatical categories. It's across the text. That's why I almost like to refer to it as a textual metaphor. You are creating across the text a particular pattern. The pattern itself becomes the basis on which you are going to to communicate a message, a second order of meaning. That second order of meaning, that theme, the theme of the work itself is the metaphor, it is the symbol. It is the symbolic value of what that text is about.
So we can understand metaphor like something beyond the literal meaning.
Yes. Perfect. So when Hassan talks about first order of meaning, think of it like literal meaning, right? When she talks about second order of meaning as like the metaphoric.
Thank you.
Very well put. Thank you.
Professor, I actually have a question about the difference between the foregrounding mentioned by Hassan and the rhetorical structure theory that we talked about earlier, because Hassan's foregrounding is about automation and then de-automation, and how does those two give us a very clear extended metaphor, but how does that differ from the structure generated by rhetorical structure theory?
Different in the sense that even what you are describing as in rhetorical structure theory is still describing it in terms of that first order of meaning. It is that coherent structure that the text as a whole communicates. But then you're saying beyond that, that by design, the verbal artist can be able to take through a consistent choice of various contrasts, create a pattern, and out of that pattern be able to produce the text. Example, take that Murder on the Orient Express, right?
Yeah.
And as you can see, what I showed you was sort of the rhetorical structure of how that last scene unfolded. And it comes across as very clearly laid out, very clearly a sort of progression through his ideas. But even in that's sort of that first order of meaning, right? It's sort of the rational, it's the explanation. But then it breaks. It goes against that sort of rational representation, and it becomes, because when he's faced with the realization that it is all of these who have committed the murder, when that is to be revealed in that revelation, the language changes from the rational to the irrational, from a highly emphasizing the ideational to the interpersonal. There's that. So what in this case, what I am saying is that I believe the Murder on the Orient Express, what the writer of the movie, all right, the script itself, not the writer of the novel, but in the way the script is written for the movie, it is to continue to build this sort of rational through a very clearly laying out what is sort of the logical ordering of things. So it's using it just as much as maybe using tense in The Widower or using theme in The Widower. Here it's using the rhetorical structure. Rhetorical structure just being another sort of kind of meaning, grammatically created meaning that then can become an automatization, can become a background against which the writer now foregrounds by changing it from the rational to the irrational, from the sort of well laid out flow of the logical structuring, the rhetorical structure, to breaking it. And at the same time, also changing the choice of theme. Instead of there is, there are, again, the existential going with the rational, combining that as sort of the background, the automatization, and then breaks it with a very agitated, and then the theme becomes you. And it's, again, it's using the same devices. When you say how is what you could really be saying is that the rhetorical structure itself becomes a resource for creating a pattern that then is eventually broken, against which the writer de-automatizes to focus your attention on that it's not about, in the case of the Murder on the Orient Express, it's not about there is right, there is wrong. Now it's past. Now it's you. It's all about you. It's not the law. It's you. It's people. Do you see my point?
Yeah. That actually makes sense, because rhetorical structure theory is an intrasentential kind of analysis.
Exactly. Which opens up again another sort of avenue for automatization, for creating a background, for creating some pattern against which to break that pattern. Good question. Very good question. Thank you. Well, guys, it's 9:50. I think we probably have to close it off there, but I'm available in the sense of email me in the meantime. If you have questions that you didn't feel like asking here and now, feel free to ask them later. I hope the points are getting across. I hope that you're beginning to see something in the way that we're looking at language and the way that we're looking at text that maybe you hadn't thought about and hadn't noticed and hadn't looked at before. All right, that's what I'm hoping you're getting out of all this. And so good luck to you with your preparation, and next week, don't forget, all right, you have two things to remember. One is the midterm test, 7 to 10. Please be sure to do that. You have to do it in that time slot, all right? You have to do it then. And secondly, you have an assignment that is due as well in week 8. Okay, it's on the 10th of March. Okay, good night.
Good night. Thank
Have
you.
a good week.